I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should have called the police first. I know that. I've replayed that night 1,000 times, and every single time, I still make the same choice. I grab my keys. I don't dial. I drive. My phone buzzed at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. I was asleep in my recliner, the television still running some old western I'd seen a dozen times. I'm 63 years old. I don't sleep like I used to, but I was deep enough under that the buzzing startled me, and when I saw my daughter's name on the screen, my chest tightened before I even answered. She's 28. She's a nurse. She works night shifts, double shifts, whatever they need. And she calls me on her lunch breaks to tell me about her patients without using their names and to ask me what I'm having for dinner. She is not a person who calls her father at 2 in the morning unless something is wrong. Dad, her voice was a thread, barely there. I'm here, I said. I was already standing. Dad, I need you to come get me. Please. A pause. A sound I couldn't identify. Please don't call Tyler's dad. Please don't tell anyone. Just come. Please. I asked her where she was. She told me the name of the building. The Hargrove Meridian on Riverside Drive downtown. 12 floors of steel and glass with a fountain out front, and a parking garage that required a fob just to enter. My son-in-law's family owned it, among other things. I asked her if she was hurt. She didn't answer that. I said, Emma, are you hurt? She said, just come, Dad. Hurry. Then the line went quiet in a way that didn't feel like a dropped call. It felt deliberate. It felt like someone had taken the phone. I put on my shoes in the dark. I didn't bother with a jacket. I was out the door in under 2 minutes, and I drove 45 miles an hour on streets that were empty and black and wet from the rain that had come through earlier that evening. I want you to understand something about that drive. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind was not steady. But my hands were, because I needed them to be, because my daughter needed me to get there, and I could not afford to put my truck in a ditch on the way. The Hargrove Meridian has a lobby with a front desk and a security guard on duty around the clock. There's a set of glass doors that lock after 9 in the evening, and you either have a key fob or you use the intercom to be buzzed in. I had been to that building maybe 4 times in 2 years of my daughter living there. My son-in-law's family didn't exactly make me feel welcome, not in a way I could point to, more in the way a room goes slightly colder when you walk in. I parked on the street. I didn't think about the parking garage. I didn't think about anything except getting through those glass doors and up to the 12th floor. I was 50 feet from the entrance when I saw him. Gerald Hargrove was standing just inside the lobby doors in a dark overcoat, even though it was 2 in the morning and he supposedly lived 40 minutes north of the city. He was a large man, well over 6 feet, the kind of man who had been athletic once and was now just solid in the way that old money makes you solid, like the weight of everything you own is distributed evenly through your body. He had silver hair and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't for what lived behind his eyes. I had met him 3 times. I had disliked him 3 times. He was standing in my way. He saw me coming across the sidewalk and he didn't move. He watched me. He let me push on the door and find it locked, and then he stood there while I pulled out my phone to call the intercom. His hand moved, and I heard a small click from somewhere behind the desk, and I understood that he had just told the guard not to let me in. I pressed the intercom button. A voice said, "Buildings closed to visitors after 9, sir." I said, "My daughter lives on the 12th floor. She called me 20 minutes ago and asked me to come get her. Her name is Emma. Emma Hargrove." Silence. Gerald had not moved. He was watching me through the glass with an expression I had never seen on a human face before, or at least I told myself I hadn't. It was the expression of a man who has already decided how this ends and is merely waiting for you to catch up. The guard's voice came back. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Hargrove has instructed us not to allow any unauthorized visitors at this time." I looked at Gerald through the glass. "I want you to picture this. A 63-year-old man standing on a wet sidewalk at 2 in the morning with no jacket on, asking to see his daughter, and a man on the other side of that door who has decided he doesn't get to." I said, through the intercom, very clearly, "My daughter called me. She asked me to come. She sounded hurt. If you do not let me in, I am going to call the police and tell them exactly what I just told you." Gerald smiled. That was the thing that undid me. That slow, deliberate smile. He leaned toward the guard and said something I couldn't hear through the glass. The guard's voice came back. "Sir, if you don't leave the premises, we'll be forced to contact the police ourselves." Do you understand what he had done? Do you see it? He had set it up so that if I called the police, they would arrive to find a trespassing complaint already filed against me. He had been ready. He had been waiting. He knew my daughter had called me, which meant he had been there when she made that call, which meant, and this is the thing that made me feel like the sidewalk was tilting, he had been there the whole time. I stepped back from the door. I looked up at the building. 12 floors. I had no idea which windows were theirs. Then I did the thing that Gerald Hargrove had not planned for. I called my daughter's friend, Patrice. Patrice was Emma's best friend from nursing school. She lived 6 blocks away. I had her number because Emma had given it to me 2 years ago and said, "If you ever can't reach me, call Patrice." I had never needed it before. I needed it now. Patrice answered on the 3rd ring, groggy and confused, and I told her what I knew in about 40 seconds. I told her Emma had called. I told her she sounded hurt. I told her I was standing outside the building and Gerald Hargrove was blocking me from getting in. Patrice said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Then she said, "Call 911, Mr. Calloway." I said, "He's already got them primed to come for me." She said, "Then I'll call them." From 6 blocks away with no complaint filed against me. I hadn't thought of that. I want to be honest with you about that. I was a father standing outside a locked building at 2 in the morning with no plan beyond getting through the door, and a 29-year-old woman 6 blocks away had already thought 3 steps ahead of me. I told her to call. She hung up. I stood there. Gerald Hargrove stood on the other side of the glass. The fountain ran. The city was quiet. I said, through the intercom, because the guard was still there, "If my daughter is hurt and I find out you kept me from her, you personally, I will make sure every person in this city knows your name." The guard didn't answer. Gerald said something to him. Gerald was smiling again. I want to tell you what I knew about Gerald Hargrove at that point in the evening, because it matters. I knew that he had made his money in real estate, that the Meridian was one of about 40 properties his company managed across 3 states. I knew that my son-in-law, Tyler, was his only child, and that Tyler worked for his father's company in a role that was never clearly defined to me, but seemed to involve flying to meetings and signing papers and being Gerald Hargrove's son. I knew that Tyler had a temper. Emma had never come out and told me that directly. She was careful. She was the kind of person who says we had a rough week when what she means is something else entirely. But I'm her father. I have known her for 28 years. I know the difference between how she sounds when things are hard and how she sounds when she's scared. She had sounded scared for about 6 months. Patrice arrived before the police did. She came at a half-run down the sidewalk in a raincoat over her pajamas, and she came straight to me and put her hand on my arm and said, "She texted me an hour ago. I didn't see it until you called." She showed me her phone. The text said, "P. I think something is wrong. I don't know what to do. He's been drinking since dinner, and Gerald is here, and I just want to leave. I can't leave." I read that text twice. I said, "What do you mean she can't leave?" Patrice looked at me with the expression of someone who has known something for a while and has been waiting for the right moment to say it, and has now decided this is that moment whether it's right or not. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "Emma told me about 4 months ago that every time she tried to leave, even just to come visit you, even just for a weekend, something happened. Tyler would get upset, or Gerald would show up and there'd be a reason she needed to stay. She said it felt like the walls kept moving." The police arrived 6 minutes after Patrice. 2 officers, a man and a woman. Gerald was already at the door when they came, already opening it, already extending his hand and smiling the smile. "Officers," he said, "thank you for coming. I'm Gerald Hargrove. I own this building. I'm sorry about all this. This gentleman has been harassing my staff." I said, "My daughter called me at 2 in the morning and asked me to come get her." The male officer looked between us. The female officer asked for my name. I gave it. She asked for my daughter's name. I gave it. She asked what apartment. I said 1216. Gerald said, My son and daughter-in-law are asleep. This man showed up uninvited and has been causing a disturbance. The female officer said, "Can we go up and check on the resident?" Gerald said, "With a warrant." The female officer looked at him steadily for a moment. She said, "Sir, if there's a welfare concern—" "There is no welfare concern," Gerald said. "My daughter-in-law is asleep. Her father showed up in the middle of the night because he's an anxious man and she didn't call him back quickly enough. I know the situation well. I can assure you everyone in that apartment is fine." Patrice stepped forward. She showed the officer her phone. She said, "Emma Hargrove texted me an hour ago saying she didn't feel safe and she couldn't leave. I'm her closest friend. This is her father. We're both worried." The female officer looked at the text. She looked at Gerald. Gerald said, "That text could mean anything. Young marriages have arguments. That doesn't give anyone the right to show up at 2 in the morning and demand entry to a private residence." The male officer said, quietly, to the female officer, something I couldn't hear. She nodded. She looked at Gerald again and said, "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step aside. We're going up to do a welfare check. We have the right to do that based on the information we've received tonight." Gerald's smile didn't disappear. It just tightened, like a knot being pulled. He said, "I'll be speaking to your supervisor in the morning." She said, "That's your right." We went up. "I want to tell you about what those elevator doors opened onto. 12th floor, beige carpeted hallway, 3 sconces on a dimmer, and my son-in-law standing in the doorway of apartment 1216 in a t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, his hair disheveled, his eyes red in a way that could be crying, or could be the drinking Patrice had mentioned, or could be both. He saw me, and his face went through 4 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, anger, neutral. He said, "What is this?" The female officer said, "We're doing a welfare check on Emma Hargrove. Can we come in?" Tyler looked at me over her shoulder. He said, "Dad said he'd handle it." I said, "Where is my daughter?" It wasn't a question. I want you to understand the difference. When you've been patient, when you've stood on a wet sidewalk for 45 minutes while a man smiled at you through glass, when you've read a text that said, "I can't leave," at some point the questions run out and what's left is just the fact of what you need. Tyler stepped back. The apartment was dim. Modern furniture, the kind that looks expensive and feels cold. The kitchen light was on. There was a glass on the counter with about an inch of amber liquid still in it. The television was off. Everything was too quiet for a place where someone was supposed to be sleeping. The female officer said, "Emma? Emma Hargrove?" "Nothing." She said it again. From down the hallway, from behind the last door on the left, a sound. Small. Barely there. Like someone testing whether it was safe to be heard. I moved before anyone could stop me. I was down that hallway in 4 steps and my hand was on that door handle and it was locked, not with a key lock, with a push-button privacy lock, the kind you can pop with a coin or a flathead screwdriver. And I had my wallet out and a card between my fingers, and I had that door open in under 10 seconds. My daughter was on the floor of the bedroom closet, with her back against the wall and her knees pulled to her chest and a bruise along her left jaw that was already turning the color of a storm cloud. She looked up at me, and the sound she made is not something I have words for. I got down on the floor next to her. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the thing your child needs is just the weight of you next to them, and I have been her father long enough to know the difference between the times for words and the times for just being there. I put my arm around her, and I felt her whole body shaking. The female officer appeared in the doorway. She saw my daughter's face. She looked back over her shoulder and said her partner's name in a voice that was completely calm and completely serious in the way that trained people get when calm and serious are the only options. Tyler was in the hallway. He said, "She fell. She tripped in the dark." The officer said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." From somewhere behind Tyler, Gerald's voice. He had come up. Of course he had come up. He said, "This is a family matter. My son." The male officer said, "Mr. Hargrove, I need you to step back, please." What followed was the part that takes the longest to explain and the shortest to experience. The paramedics came. Emma had a fractured cheekbone. She had bruising on her left arm that the paramedic said was consistent with being grabbed. She had been in that closet for somewhere between an hour and 90 minutes. She had locked herself in. She told me, in the ambulance, what she'd been afraid to say for 6 months. She told me about the first time, which had been small, which had been the kind of thing you explain away. She told me about the progression of it. She told me about the way Gerald would show up and Tyler would be fine for a week and then it would start again. She told me that Gerald had told her, twice, that if she ever left Tyler, the Hargrove family had lawyers who would make her professional life very difficult, that they had connections to the hospital board, that things could be made complicated for her in ways that would be hard to trace. I listened to all of it. I held her hand. I did not say any of the things I wanted to say. At some point in the night, while Emma was being treated, I stepped into the hallway and I called my own lawyer. I want to address the thing that multiple people said in the comments of that other story, about calling a lawyer. They were right. The first thing you do is call a lawyer. I didn't call him first. I called him as soon as my daughter was safe, and I will tell you this, that phone call, at 4 a.m, to a man who had done my will and my property transfers and not much else, turned out to be the thing that mattered most. Because he knew someone, and that someone knew someone. And within 48 hours there was a picture forming that none of us had been able to see clearly before. What I'm about to tell you took several weeks to fully come to light, but I'm going to tell it to you here because you deserve to understand what was actually happening inside that building, inside that family, inside the thing my daughter had walked into when she was 26 years old and in love. Gerald Hargrove had been managing his son's inheritance from his mother, Tyler's mother, who had died when Tyler was 19, through a series of property arrangements that looked legitimate from the outside. Tyler had always been told that the estate was complicated, that it was tied up in the company holdings, that he'd get full access to it when Gerald retired or transferred management. Tyler believed this because Tyler had grown up believing whatever his father told him, because that is what you do when your mother is gone and your father is the only solid thing in the room. The inheritance was real. It was substantial. What was not real was the explanation for where it had gone. My lawyer's contact, a forensic accountant in the truest sense of the word, the kind who makes his living following money through the dark, found the first irregularity within 3 days. Then he found 7 more. Gerald had not stolen the money outright. He had moved it, restructured it, buried it inside holding companies and blind trusts in a way that gave him effective control while leaving Tyler's name on just enough paper to make it look legitimate. Tyler had been signing documents for years without understanding what he was signing. He had trusted his father. When Tyler understood this, and this is the part I will carry with me, when Tyler finally understood the full shape of what his father had done, something in him changed. I watched it happen from a distance. Emma told me about it. She said Tyler had come to the hospital and sat with her and said very little for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I didn't know about most of it." She said he was crying. She said she believed him about some of it, and that she wasn't sure yet what she believed about the rest. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what to do with Tyler. I don't know if he is a man who was also a victim and also hurt my daughter, and what you do with both of those things being true at the same time. That's not a question I can answer for you. I can tell you that my daughter is the one who decides, and that I will support whatever she decides, and that the only thing I told her once, clearly, and then I didn't say it again, was that the door of my house is always open. Gerald Hargrove retained 3 lawyers within 48 hours of the night I'm telling you about. He retained them the way a man does when he already knows what's coming, and he's trying to build a wall between himself and it. The wall did not hold. The forensic findings were too clean. The paper trail was too long. 3 of his properties were frozen as part of a civil action filed on Tyler's behalf. Tyler, who turned out to have more backbone than his father had ever given him credit for, once his father's hands were no longer on the levers. The criminal investigation into the financial fraud is ongoing. As of right now, I am not a lawyer, and I won't tell you how it ends, because I genuinely don't know. What I know is that Gerald Hargrove no longer smiles at me. The last time I saw him, in a hallway outside a mediator's office 3 weeks ago, he looked at me the way people look at something that didn't go the way they planned. I looked back at him. I didn't smile either. I just looked. My daughter moved into the apartment above mine on the 1st of December. She painted it yellow, which is her color, the color of everything she's ever chosen when she was allowed to choose freely. She brought her plants. She brought her nursing textbooks and the framed photo of the two of us from her graduation day and the quilt her grandmother made. She put it all in yellow rooms, and she slept for about 11 hours the first night. I heard her moving around upstairs around noon. I put coffee on. A few minutes later, she knocked on my door and I opened it, and she was standing there in her pajamas with her hair in a knot, and she looked, I want to be careful about this word, she looked like herself. Like the version of herself that had been somewhere else for a while and had come back. I handed her a mug. She sat down at my kitchen table. I sat across from her. Neither of us said anything for a minute or two, which is something we've always been able to do, sit in the quiet without needing to fill it. She said, I should have called you sooner. I said, you called when you were ready. She looked at her coffee. She said, I kept thinking I could fix it. I kept thinking if I was better, calmer, smarter, if I just figured out the right thing to do, it would get better. I said, I know. She said, it wasn't about me at all, was it? I said, it never is, with people like that. She nodded. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside the window, the yard was bare and gray, early winter, the kind of morning that doesn't offer much but doesn't ask for much either. She said, you drove 45 minutes at 2 in the morning with no jacket on. I said, I was warm enough. She said, you were not warm enough. Your lips were blue when I saw you in the hallway. I said, I'm old. My circulation isn't what it was. She laughed. It was small and a little ragged around the edges, the kind of laugh that has some crying still attached to it. But it was real. I had not heard her laugh in a long time. I want to tell you this last thing. Not about Gerald and not about the investigation and not about what happens to Tyler or what my daughter eventually decides. I want to tell you about what happened to me on that wet sidewalk at 2 in the morning, standing on the wrong side of a locked glass door while a man inside smiled at me. I have not always been a man of much consequence. I was an engineer for 30 years. I designed drainage systems and load calculations, and I was good at it. But it is not the kind of work that makes you feel large. I raised my daughter after her mother left when Emma was 11, and I did that the best I could, which meant imperfectly, which meant there were things I missed and things I got wrong. I am 63 years old and I live alone, and I have a recliner I fall asleep in and a truck with 140,000 miles on it. And for the most part, I try not to take up more space in the world than I need to. But I'll tell you something about that sidewalk. Standing there, looking at that man through the glass, knowing my daughter was up on the 12th floor and something was wrong. I was not afraid. I was not uncertain. I did not feel old or small or without consequence. I felt like her father. And that, it turned out, was exactly enough. If there is someone in your life who calls you at 2 in the morning not because they want something, but because they need you, because you are the person they reach for when they are most afraid, then you already know what I'm talking about. You already know that feeling. Don't let anyone put glass between you and that. Don't stop. Don't explain. Drive.